Ah! I have risen my pillow fortress! Do you dare enter the steadfast plushy defenses that I have risen? My fortress of doom that lies before you? It's to protect me against all the crazy plot developments that are about to happen in Wano. Also, Kaido, because I don't know if you heard, word through the grapevine, a messenger just came to the West Pillow Gate this morning. Kaido is a dragon! There's only one thing I can think of that might actually be able to take him down. A black sword! The hell is this? Link, you need to get a black sword to make it work. Just gonna... Okay. Alright, now I am defended.
Oh no, the giant's falling on the fortress!
Oh no! All of the men are no more! Okay, so, it's always great when a theory, just loops around and ends up being true. I mean, it's not really confirmed to be true. It wasn't like in the last chapter, Gyukimaru came out and said, black blades, the reason they're black is because armament Haki is used a lot and it permeates into the metal permanently. Well after the user's dead. He didn't come out and directly say it, but he strongly implied, and that's good enough for me. So we're going to do a sequel to the Black Swords video I did about a year ago. The general theory, in case you're unaware, is the reason that Mihawk's sword and Shusui and probably a few other swords in the One Piece world that are black, the reason they're that color is not because of a special metal or anything like that. The reason they are black is because constant use of armament Haki. So we're just going to break that down today and really figure out, the mechanism on how that works and how Zoro might actually get a true black sword that he himself created in this arc. And I also want to talk about the possibility of saying goodbye to Shusui during this arc, based off something that Mihawk actually said. So, first, let's talk about this. I'm just going to continue the rest of this video just with the assumption that, yeah, the whole armament Haki blade thing is 100% confirmed. It isn't exactly, but that's what this video is going to be, alright? So if you're not a fan of the theory and you still don't think it's going to be the case, then I don't know what to tell you. You build a pillow fort or something if you want something to do with your time, okay? So first question is this. We know armament Haki can turn blades black, but how exactly does that process work? There's two ways I came to look at this. Either you have to live a really long time, constantly pouring armament Haki into the blade. It's just an issue of time, and if you just keep doing it and doing it and doing it, eventually it stays that way. Or the other way of looking at it is it's not really so much about the time, rather than the intensity of it. Let's say you're up against really strong swordsmen and you're constantly putting armament Haki into your blade and you're clashing with other swordsmen, constantly doing that. Eventually it's just going to stay that way. So it's more about the battles that you fight rather than just the amount of time. Because if it's just an issue of time, Zoro could in theory maybe start meditating with his blades or something, and he could take his Wado Ichimonji and pour Haki into it and just try to maintain it as long as he could. And then after that fails, maybe he tries again the next day, doing that that Jinzen meditation with your blade thing in Bleach. Ichigo, he has a black sword too. Did you know Ichigo had armament Haki? Well, now you do. So it could be something like that, where maybe it's just okay, I'm just going to keep pouring armament Haki into my blade for this many hours a day, and then after so many days, it'll eventually just stick. Or it could be, no, it's not really about that. It's more about clashing with stronger and stronger opponents, and if they use armament Haki too, maybe it's just the blades clashing together. That just helps cement the armament in. The reason I'm concerned about this is because I really want Zoro to make a black sword of his own. Yes, of course he has Shusui, but this isn't one that he himself created. Ryuma created it, okay? And the way that Gyukimaru talked about it, he's just Ryuma had Shusui in constant battles, and because of those constant battles over the years, his blade eventually grew. There was one translation that said grew, and there was other translations that said evolved too, but it's the same general idea. It started out as a regular katana, and it became a black blade over time. Okay, but we didn't really know what Gyukimaru meant by that. Did he just mean okay, because Ryuma lived a long time, constantly fighting, that was the deciding factor for why he had an armament blade. He had a black blade because he lived a long time. Or did he imply it was because of the battles themselves? Because once again, we don't know how long Ryuma lived. When we see his corpse, his zombie, his marionette on Thriller Bark, he did have gray hair. Now, you know, I don't think you're gonna really look that good when you're dead. So I don't know. Someone would have to like let me know about that. Like, if you were in your 30s when you died, would your hair still turn gray even after your body is dead? I don't know that. You know, then again, I mean, this is Hogback. He might have modified him in some way. Maybe he didn't even have hair. Maybe Hogback added hair to him or something just to make him look more Japanesey or authentic as a samurai. I have no idea. But if we're just going to assume Ryuma lived a long life, maybe into his 60s or possibly 70s, considering he was like the national like hero and like basically the god of Wano country that defended their shores against the world government. Like, the whole reason the world government is afraid of Wano, the whole reason Wano is as isolated as it is because the world government doesn't screw with it because of Ryuma. He's the one that set that precedence, okay? So I like to assume he lived a really long time up into his old age. He was like this wise, super powerful, badass samurai. Basically how I viewed Orochi before he turned out to be Orochi, you know, like a grandmaster of the six samurai kind of archetype. That was Ryuma! Okay, so yeah, it could have been something like that. He lived a long time, or it could just be, you know, a lot of battles. Now, here's a few problems with that. So we have Mihawk's Yoru, rather lovely blade. It's quite nice, isn't it? I know, it really ties the room together. So Mihawk is only in his early 40s. That actually always screws me up, because I keep wanting Mihawk to be younger than Shanks. You know, I keep wanting Shanks to be like, you know, he's the well-established greatest swordsman in the world, and then Mihawk in his younger years looked up to Shanks and like, one day I will fight him. But no, Mihawk's actually older than him. It's only by a few years, but still. Now, Mihawk, though, already has a black blade. So that either implies one of three things, so pick your poison. Number one, it really is just dependent on, like, maybe meditating with your sword, having your sword for a long time. Now, it still might be years. I don't like that to be the case, because if that's the case, it might be quite a while until Zoro makes a black sword of its own, if there's, like, a prerequisite. If it's like, no, yeah, you can get a black blade, but you gotta spend 10 years pouring armament Haki into your sword in order to get it. I mean, possibly you might be able to, well, no, because Zoro might have had his Wado Ichimonji for that long, but he hasn't known armament Haki for that long, so that's not the case, right? So I really don't like that to be the situation, but that's one possibility. Mihawk had Yoru for a long time. Honestly, Yoru might have looked like the sword that giant human drill had, but, you know, I don't think Oda had anything to do with that. I don't think he, like, designed the human drill or anything. I think it was more of just the anime department looking at it and being like, yeah, the human drill, the boss of the human drills was smart enough to just make a replica of Mihawk's blade, right? And the reason they made it a regular steel blade rather than a black blade is maybe just to, you know, add a difference between Mihawks and the baboons. Maybe that's the thing that Toei said. Or maybe Oda only gave them a note like, yeah, it's fine if you want to do that, just make sure the baboon doesn't have a black blade, because I'm going to do with something like that later. So that's one possibility, though. It was like a normal blade, and then Mihawk just meditated with it, poured armament in it. The second idea is that, yeah, Mihawk has obviously been in a lot of battles with a lot of strong swordsmen, Shanks included, and so maybe just through those constant battles, the armament Haki permeated. Or the third possibility is that Mihawk's blade Yoru, very similar to how Zoro got Shusui, it was already a black blade when Zoro got it. Maybe whenever Mihawk got Yoru, it was already a black sword. Now, here's something interesting. Maybe not all of them, and maybe, possibly, but maybe the grade of the sword will automatically rank up immediately as soon as the blade is becoming a black blade, right? So it might be possible that all of the Saijo Owazumono grade swords might have become world-renowned and world-famous because they were used by many people that turned them into black blades, and then they were continuously passed down. The only problem with that theory is that Shusui is not a Saijo Owazumono grade sword. It is just a Owazumono, which is still a really great class of sword. It's a, you know, it's the second to the top, but still, you know, if I'm gonna have this theory like, oh, the black blades in the world are Saijo Owazumono, but that could still be the case. It might just be ranked up. Like, for example, Shusui, maybe when Ryuma first got it, it might have been just a Wazumono grade. It might have been like the lowest rank of Meito. It might have been the same rank as the Sandai or Tashigi Shigure, right? And then it's because he continued to fight with it and level it up. When he eventually turned it into a Black Blade, the Meito grade rose to become O Wazumono. So maybe Mihawk's Yoru, before it was a Black Blade, maybe it was just an O Wazumono, and then he made it into a Black Blade, or somebody else before him made it into a Black Blade, and then it rose to the highest status. You know, it's kind of hard to tell because the only Sideshow O Wazumono grade sword we've seen so far is the Yoru. We know that the Shodai Katetsu, the first generation one, most likely wielded by Samurai Gandhi, if it is the same sword that Samurai Gandhi has, I believe we have seen it out of its sheath before. I'm not sure if this scene was anime exclusive, but I'm pretty sure a lot of the stuff with the Gorosei is really important, so I think that's canon, what his sword looks like. So if that's the case, it's not a Black Blade. So maybe they don't have to necessarily be black swords, but it's nice to theorize, you know? Okay. So, something else about Shanks, though. That's the weird one. Okay, so now if we're going to go along with this theory that, like, you have a sword master, somebody that's really good at swinging a blade, and they have armament Haki, and they just fight for a long enough time, or meditate a long enough time, however, they get a black sword. Well, what about Shanks? Shanks was probably the best swordsman in the world until Mihawk took that title. Maybe Shanks didn't really care about the title. Look, maybe even want to say Shanks is stronger than Mihawk. It's just Shanks doesn't care about the title, so he's like, yeah, Mihawk, fine. You could go around and call yourself the greatest swordsman. I don't care. Whichever, he's still a really great swordsman, and yet his blade, Griffin, is not a black sword. It's just a saber he pulls out, and it's just a normal blade. So that brings to a question a few things, right? Maybe it does require just a tremendous amount of time to do that. And if that's the case, you know, maybe Ryuma spent most of his life fighting with Shusui. Like, if Ryuma got Shusui, let's say when he was like a teenager, let's say, or even a child, let's say it's the same as Zoro. Zoro was like 8 or 9 years old when he got his hands on the Wado Ichimonji, right? So let's say Shusui came in the hands of Ryuma when he was a little kid, and he had it for pretty much his entire life, and it didn't turn into a black sword until he was in his 60s or 70s. Right? So that's the reason even a master like Shanks doesn't have a black sword yet, because there's really no reason for him not to have one, right? I can't come up with any logical reason why Shanks would just be like, yeah, if I meditate with Griffin enough times and just keep pouring armament into it, it'll eventually turn into a black blade before I know it. I really don't feel like it, though. You know, my other thought is Griffin might not have been his original sword. Maybe Shanks switches out swords, but I don't like that idea, because I like the fact that, you know, Shanks' sword is Griffin. That's what he's well known for. It's like the saber. It's got the guard and everything, and that's how he's fought. It would be like saying, yeah, you know, Mihawk switches out other swords. He doesn't just use Yoru. I mean, yeah, he has that little tiny pocket knife thing, and I'm sure when Mihawk first started out, he didn't have Yoru, but I think right now his main sword is just Yoru, right? It's like Zoro has his 3 swords, and he doesn't go to any other sword unless, like, there's like a certain moment where he's incapacitated, he doesn't have a sword. Like in the last chapter, he had to use Kamazo's sickle in order to fight against him. You know, that's something he just came up with a chance of opportunity. Also, the same thing that happened during Marineford when Shu was rusting all of his swords. He rusted Yubashiri. He had to pick up some random just cutlasses off the ground and fight with those, and so his swords wouldn't get rusted, right? So he's done stuff like that, right? Now, going back to the problem, though, if that's the case, and it takes, like, decades upon decades to get that, Zoro's probably not going to get a black sword of himself. The only way around that is, okay, is it dependent on the same kind of armament Haki? Here is my question with that. The Katetsu, the Sandai Katetsu, that's a cursed blade that's been floating around for a long time. So is the Nidai Katetsu. Could it work like someone had the Sandai well before Zoro, used armament Haki on it, fought with it, died because of the curse, and then the sword floated around to the next person, they picked it up, they started using armament, they died because of the curse, and it just continues on that line until Zoro eventually stumbles upon it in Ippon Matsu's shop, and then it's like, okay, a lot of people have been working on pumping armament into this thing over the decades, but now I'm the one that's going to finally, like, cap it off. I'm the one that's finally going to finally achieve that. I guess the same thing could be said for Wado Ichimonji, because that sword's probably been around for a long time as well. So, if it works like that, there might still be a ridiculous amount of time for that to happen. Maybe Ryuma was just one of the people to do it all on his own, but if you could do like a baton pass sort of thing, then it might work. It might be possible. Now, here's the problem with Shusui. I mentioned at the beginning of this video, like, we might have to say goodbye to Shusui in this arc. Now, I was always under the impression that, yeah, Zoro's gonna get this sword back. He won it fair and square in a duel with Ryuma. Everybody at Wano, they just don't understand the circumstances. They don't understand that Zoro met Ryuma. I understand it's a fantastical tale of zombies and shadows and some strange, you know, lion man that turned invisible. It's a weird tale, right? Fine. But I always figured he was going to get it back. He was going to convince them somehow, or maybe Ryuma's ghost appears over his blade and, like, gives the thumbs up, like, yeah, this green-haired swordsman deserves it. But if Zoro finds out about how black blades are created, maybe Zoro might have the idea, like, I don't want to piggyback on someone else's accomplishments, you know? I don't want to pick up somebody else's sword and use that because it was something that he created himself. I want to make my own sword black, my own, you know, my own armament Haki, my own way. Of course, going with that logic, the whole baton pass idea I had a little while ago, that doesn't work either. So, it might just come down to the fact of, like, if Zoro just puts a lot of armament into it and clashes with another strong opponent over and over and over and over again, it turns black, and I would be okay with that. But the only problem is the Shanks thing. It's just like, why doesn't Shanks have a black one if that's all you had to do to make one, right? Also, some people, I brought this up in the review, but I actually cut it out because I thought, the review's long enough. And the review actually somehow ended up being exactly 40 minutes long. I don't know how that happened, but whatever. I brought up the whole issue at Marineford involving Mihawk's Yoru and Buggy, because Buggy, of course, got diced up by Yoru, and, like, he's just little sashimi, and then he just stacks himself back together, like, enough, you stupid Hawkeye bastard, and he shoots the Muggy ball, but Mihawk's just, and just knocks it back at him. That funny scene. People are like, well, if armament Haki is constantly permeated in the blade, then shouldn't a Buggy have died in that scene? This has been something that has been analyzed to death. You know, like, somewhere out there on the internet, like on the Oro Jackson or the One Piece subreddit, there's a team of OP scientists, not OPI scientists, that's something completely different. OP scientists, they're swirling, like, beakers, and they're doing math and stuff, trying to figure out all the mysteries of One Piece, and I think the general consensus on this is that the way Buggy's Bara Bara no Mi splits him apart is as long as the blade comes within, like, super close, like a millimeter of touching his flesh, that's when it splits. And so his body was already split by the time the sword sliced him. That's the way it works. Like, it's an automatic splitting. It's not like the blade itself has to come in direct contact with his flesh and then he splits apart. All right, that's the general idea. And if this theory that armament Haki remains inside of the sword, that basically has to be the case, because otherwise that would be a plot hole on Oda's part, or it would mean that Buggy's fruit splits him apart before the blade actually touches him. One of the two. I don't know if Oda would ever explain it or reference it, but that would be probably the case. So, yeah, what do you guys think about that? Do you think Zoro could give up Shusui? Now, if he does give up Shusui, I think, and maybe swaps it out for the Nidai Kitetsu or something, I think, of course, the blade that we would all want him to turn into a black sword would be the Wado Ichimonji. I mean, the Kitetsus are cool and all that stuff, but the Wado Ichimonji, that's his main sword, alright? That's the one he started with, that's the one that didn't get broken when he fought against Mihawk, it's the one that reminds him of Kuina and the Promise and everything like that. So, yeah, if you're gonna make any sword permanently black, make it the Wado Ichimonji, and as I said in the video, I think that would be really cool and kind of like, you know, good contrasting colors, and like they complement each other. Like, you have this beautifully, like, pure blade, you know, a white scabbard and all that stuff, and the white wrappings, but it becomes like a black sword. That would be so cool to contrast, you know. But yeah, how and, you know, when is he going to do that? That's a question. You know, people have brought up, like, you know, how Oda drew Zoro if he's a lot older. Like, here's Zoro at age 40, here's Zoro at age 60. well, we might not see him having a permanent black sword until he's that old. Like, maybe the same thing that happened with Ryuma. Now, keep in mind, we could still see it do that. I mean, he could still armament any one of his swords up anytime he wants. It's just not permanently like that like Shusui is. Alright, so we could still see that kind of aesthetic, but... we want him to create his own, right? The build your own black blade workshop. It's next to the Build-A-Bear workshop, But yeah, that's the main questions I guess I'm having. Does it take time or is it battle experience? If it takes time, then Zoro's probably not going to get it unless he discovers some kind of shortcut. And there might be some kind of shortcut for all we know. We don't know how this crap works. I'm just kind of grasping at straws here. Maybe Gyukimaru or maybe one of Ryuma's descendants knows about like a secret method that Ryuma had in order to, if it normally requires 60 years, but Ryuma did it in only 3. Or something like that. And then Zoro does it in only 3 weeks. I don't know how this would work, but, there might be another shortcut around it, but it either takes a lot of time or it takes a lot of fights. But if it takes a lot of fights, then what's up with Shanks's blade, right? I really don't want to come up with the excuse of like, well, maybe Oda didn't think of that beforehand, so next time we see Shanks using his griffin, it is going to be a black blade, and Oda could just retcon it. Yeah, I mean, he could, but I think at that point in the story, the first time we saw Shanks use Griffin, I think maybe Oda should have had a good idea at that point, maybe with the black blades and everything, because that was right before Shusui got introduced. That was right at the end of the Enies Lobby arc when we first saw him use Griffin, I think, against Whitebeard. We might have seen him pull out beforehand, but that was the one moment I remember that was really clearly shown in the manga and the anime, like he actually takes out his sword ready to fight against Whitebeard or clash with Whitebeard. That was right before Thriller Bark. That was right before Shusui was introduced. Yoro was well established at that point. So if Oda had the idea, because I don't think maybe right way back at the beginning of the series, Oda had this idea for armament Haki, black blades, and all that stuff. Maybe he just thought, oh yeah, Mihawk. Maybe he just thought, oh yeah, Mihawk using a black sword. That makes sense. He's a cool guy. Needs a cool black sword to use, and giant blade swings it around. Fine. But, yeah, that would be my biggest concern there. And I guess the last question is, do you think Zoro's going to give it up? Do you think after maybe learning Ryuma's story and how a black blade is created, Zoro's going to be like, oh, okay, that's good to know, and then just pick up Shusui and not even care? Like, I don't care how it worked. This is my sword now. Ryuma wanted me to have this. I'm going to have it. And maybe I can use this sword as a hint to make my other swords black as well. Because remember what Mihawk said. He said all swords can become Kikoku or can become a black blade, right? So if that's the situation, maybe it's like, okay, Zoro has to give up Shusui in this arc, but it's okay because any blade can become a black blade. So that means even if he has to give up his sword and swap it out for like the Nidai or whatever, he can eventually make all of his blades that way. And I'm sure Mihawk did not tell him like in detail what he meant. Zoro, even when he was fighting Gyukimaru, was just like, that has been bugging me for a while. Probably what's been bugging him is what Mihawk said about black blades and then Shusui's blade. Mihawk didn't sit Zoro down and explain like, all right, Roanoa, allow me to explain to you how a black blade is created. As I sip my wine, for I am Mihawk. A black blade is created when a user pours armament Haki into the blade for exactly 666 days to the exact minute. Like, it's like that's how it works. Like, I don't know, man. I don't know. But yeah, this theory I'm gonna call true. That has been a thing. As for the fate of Shusui, I think that's up in the air right now. I was kind of like, 100% Zoro was going to get it back, but we've had it stolen from him technically 3 times now because, Wicca stole it back in Dressrosa, but we're just going to have it like, oh no, he got it stolen twice in the same arc so far, and Zoro's just like, give it back, just give it back, it's my sword. But that might make us spin after we find out the history of Ryuma. So, let me know what you guys think about that below. I'm going to head back into my pillow fortress because I don't know what else is going to be coming for me here. Bring it on, dragons! I'm ready for ya!